thankful, but more importantly for sharing and sharing something that I'm sure will resonate with many people in the room. And I'm really grateful for your honesty, because it's those moments of honesty as we share as a church family. We draw closer together, but we draw closer together with God. And I want to thank you for that. Psalm 32 is a psalm of confession. You know that because we're doing confession this morning. And we see that David, who we believe is the author of this psalm, is seeking forgiveness and restoration. Now, unlike other psalms written by David which seek forgiveness, we don't believe that this is kind of triggered by a specific event. Other psalms, such as 51, will closely kind of interlink with David's story. But this psalm is very simply written with the perspective that the psalmist views humans as sinning beings. The psalmist views humans as sinning beings. That means that this morning, I'm here to tell you that you're going to mess up. You probably already have. If you haven't already, you've done very well. But we mess up, don't we? As disciples, we mess up. We get it wrong. And as Christians and as people, I hate to generalize, but I'm about to, there are generally two types of people, which are those of us that have a very high view of ourselves, who maybe sat there thinking that I'm preaching to everyone else about confession because you never get it wrong. But then there's others of you whose voices I hear say that they are no more than their mistakes, who have too low a view of themselves. They are unable to believe that they are more than their mistakes, more than their failings, that God's forgiveness isn't as full as their failure. And very often, as human beings, we kind of switch between the two, don't we? Often one is masking the other perspective. But the psalmist is here to say we all get it wrong, we are all messing up, and we are all finding ourselves short of what we could and should and ought to be. Now, the opening line of this psalm is really interesting, and it says this. It says, "Blessed is the ones whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit." Do you remember there was like a few years ago, there was that kind of like trend of hashtag blessed? Do you remember that? And it was kind of a bit cringe and eye roll. It feels a bit trite. The idea that this kind of word blessed, which is actually one of those religious words, has kind of become a bit meaningless and benign. But actually, the blessed life, when we think about kind of adverts that try to persuade us of a kind of enviable states of well-being. So if you think about like vitamin adverts and like people like running and healthy and glowing, they have loads of energy all the time. We think about that as kind of that blessed life, that the good life, the best of what life could be, that most of us glimpse here and now, experience now and then, but that blessed, that good life isn't found in a product or in a person. But in fact, David is here to tell us this morning that the blessed life, a good life, is found in confession. Probably not what you wanted to hear this morning, is it? It is found in one who knows their flaws, their failings. So they don't have too high a view of themselves. They don't have too low a view of themselves. They're aware that they are a sinful being and that they fail and that they are in need of forgiveness. But also, the good life is someone who knows that they can have it if they ask for it. David comes to assure us that as failed as we are, as failing as we are, God's grace and mercy and forgiveness always reaches the problematic things about who we are and what we do. And so this line says, blessed is the ones whose sins are covered. And this language about covering and uncovering, it's kind of like an obvious idea when you think about it. But if you go back to Genesis 3, and we have Adam and Eve, having fun in the garden, and then it goes wrong, doesn't it? And they eat the apple. It goes wrong, and they eat the apple, and they become aware of themselves. And it says in Genesis, and I haven't got a slide for this, sorry, so you're going to have to trust me. It says that their eyes were opened, and they discovered they were naked. Awful, okay? And they discovered that they were naked. So right at the beginning of the human story, whether you believe it literally or as a story, is this idea that human beings feel a great sense of shame for who they are and for the choices that they make. And that we don't really like being wholly vulnerable. Now, I've checked around. Everybody in here has got clothes on, which tells me that either you understand that people should probably wear clothes in church and other places too, but also, if we're honest, we don't really want to be seen naked, right? Are you with me? Right? There's parts of our bodies that we don't want to be seen. And there's parts of our lives, our thought life, the way that we spend our money, the way that we spend our time, the time when we sit scrolling. There's parts of our lives that we feel a kind of sense of shame about. Is that right? There's things that we don't want everybody to know. And the reason I know that every single person in here has parts of their lives that they wouldn't want to be known by everybody in the room is that I think you would all feel quite vulnerable if I asked to have your phone and your passcode, okay? Because let's be honest, our phone would contain those cross emails that we have drafted and sometimes sent. It would have the notes app of our rambling thoughts and our feelings at 2 a.m., perhaps the things that we've said to our phone and not our spouse. It has the screenshots of, like, you know, that colleague at work that puts up really embarrassing things, screenshots, and we might have shared it by accident. You know, sometimes that happens because we're bad people. We know that some of us will have slightly strange, I'm not saying that you have dirty secrets, but I'm saying there's things about our life that are perfectly normal, but you don't want people to know. There are times when we have Googled, how tall is ant of ant? You know, it's the embarrassing Googles. Can a cat eat custard? It's things like that which are normal. We all do it, but we keep covered, don't we? You know, like if somebody picks up your phone and they saw that you'd been Googling if your cat can eat custard, you'd be slightly embarrassed at times. Okay. There are games. What about your alarms, where you've got an alarm set for 6:01, 6:02, 6:03? It just makes you look a mess, doesn't it? There's times when we take photos of things and there's like 47 photos of the same thing, slightly different, but we've not gone back through to decide which one we love. What I'm saying is, there's things that we keep concealed, and not necessarily dangerous things, not necessarily things that are soul issues, you know, really bad stuff. But as human beings, we live with shame. We live wanting privacy. We want things to be covered in our lives. Some things are just for us. And that means we develop in life, but also as disciples, a tendency to not talk about the things that are going on. That actually the practice of confession, particularly outside of the Catholic tradition, is probably one that we stay away from because it makes us uncomfortable and it makes us feel vulnerable. And David writes this psalm, this prayer of confession, to remind us that a blessed life, #blessed, is one in which we are fully known. A blessed life is one where we don't have to cover up everything about who we are or what we've done. It doesn't have to be known by everyone, but it's known between us and God. And that the good life is one where we have developed this habit, this pattern, this discipline of confession that helps us to have an open dialogue and awareness of ourselves and of God's forgiveness and of others. Because so often, unforgiveness is silence. We don't talk about it. We don't acknowledge it. And yet sometimes internally, that is a very, very noisy place to be. Do you know what I'm saying? That sometimes when we've messed up, it's really, really noisy inside our heads about what has happened. And Martin Luther King has this really powerful quote. He says this, that forgiveness is not an occasional act. It's a permanent attitude. And within his context, he was talking about segregation and human rights and race. But it's an important reminder that forgiveness is a posture that we adapt, where we seek it for ourselves and we seek it for others, not occasionally, but regularly, because of our brokenness. And because being forgiven is a glimpse of that good life that God has for us. So what happens when we don't confess? David also gives us this insight to that. And in verses 3 and 4, you will be able to read that he says, when I kept silent, so before I confessed, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night, your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. You know when you've done something wrong and you just feel awful? He describes it beautifully. That when we live with regret, with hurt, with pain, with disappointment, there's a cost. And we might not be saying anything, but in time it becomes clear because of its toll on us. That when we live with things that we don't need to, there is an effect. And there is a turning point here at the center of the psalm in verse 5 that says this: I acknowledge my sin. I did not cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to Yahweh. And so this verse 5, right in the center, is a turning point from what happens when we hold things inside to the fullness of life that's experienced, that good life, that #blessed life that God intends for us. And if you look at this at the very beginning, he says, I acknowledge it. So he names it. I didn't cover my iniquity. I expose it. I stop covering it. I recognize what it is. And I confess transgressions. We want to tell the truth about what the consequences are of our actions. Now, several months ago, some of you who were here and might have been listening will remember that we looked about reconciliation. And I used that illustration where I talked about that thing about I cracked the egg. Do you remember that? So sometimes when we make apologies, we kind of do fake apologies, and we'll say like, oh, I didn't mean to crack the egg, or, I didn't intend for it to end up broken and stuff like that. And confession includes an important reminder. And there's a great quote here that says this, which is true repentance begins where whitewashing, so that's saying, well, nothing really happened, it wasn't a big deal, and blame shifting, which was, it wasn't really my fault. And self-pity, which is, I'm sorry because of what it cost me. And self-flagellation, which is, well, I feel so terrible, you would never be able to make me feel bad about it. End. So confession, true confession, means we have to work through this. Because so often our confession is this. Our seeking forgiveness from God is this. And it's not, I cracked the egg. It's not living with the failure. It's pointing at everyone and everything that made the failure happen. And so confession is to name and expose the things that we live with. Now, there's something interesting in David's writing, which is that he uses 3 different words for the same thing. So he talks about sin, iniquity, and transgression. And those are 3 different words to describe sin, doing things wrong. But they have, in the original Hebrew, a slight kind of different emphasis. So the first one, sin, which I think is kachata, it's like you have to kind of like cough when you say it, is that human thing of missing the mark. So never quite getting it right, that kind of general failure to be the fullness of what God intends for us. Iniquity is avon, which is our waywardness, our tendency to stray, our kind of just drifting, not making good choices, but nothing kind of by intention. And then transgression, that word, pisha, is the willful violation. That's rebellion. That's deciding deliberately, knowingly to do the wrong thing. And David's language here covers, in his view, the totality of human failing. The times when we get it wrong just because we're human, the times when we drift, the times when we choose to do the wrong thing. And David's language here is deliberate, which is to say, we do all of these things. But that also points towards the totality of God's forgiveness. That whether you miss the mark, whether you drift, or whether you choose to do the wrong thing, God's forgiveness is enough. And in verse 5, the end of that phrase is, and you forgave me. The confidence that whatever we do, God's grace is bigger. whatever we can do, whatever we confess to, whatever we bring into the light, God's forgiveness is bigger. And the good life is getting it out there in our relationship with God. So confession is all very well, but confession without change is just doing the same thing over and over again, knowing that we'll get forgiveness. And we see in verse 8 God's response. And God comes back and he says this, I will instruct you and teach you in the way that you go. I will counsel you with my loving eye on you. Do not be like a horse or a mule. I find it quite interesting that in this psalm, David is like really gracious, really wants forgiveness. And God basically replies saying, don't be a donkey, which have no understanding. They must be controlled by bit or bridle, and they will not come to you. And it sounds a little bit insulting, and perhaps it is, and there's good reason for it, which is that donkeys and horses, they're stubborn, they're unpredictable, but they don't, like a donkey doesn't think about what the right thing to do is. A donkey doesn't consider like the health and safety or the value of who's on its back or like the right way to go or whether a path will get it to the right destination. A donkey responds, in essence, to pressure, a bit in its mouth, to pain, to discipline, or to consequence. And God's response here is to say, my mercy and my grace is huge, is limitless, is enough for anything that you can do and is enough for you. But if you want to do this as a disciple, there is a deep work that goes with confession, a deep work of teaching and instructing and learning, where that forgiveness and that restoration doesn't just take us back to where we were, but moves us on. That in some way we learn something from what we have done, and we try to live better for it. And so confession and that deep work of knowing who we are always leads to change. We know that because that's why people go to counselling. When they become aware of who they are, when they work through who they are, when they can own and cope with who they are and what they have lived with and what they have done, we see change. I want to show you a video, and I wonder, the challenge is to identify the painting at the end of it. Okay, does anyone recognize the painting? No. That's okay. We can all learn this morning. That's good. This was an advert done, I think ING is a bank. Is that right? People are nodding. Okay, ING is a bank, and they did this to advertise that the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam was being opened after, I think, nearly 10 years of being closed. And the most famous painting in the Rijksmuseum is this one, which is The Night Watch by Rembrandt, okay? Can you see the similarity? You've got the girl with the chicken, the guy in the front with the red sash. Now, this painting is fascinating, and it was done by Rembrandt, and it is massive. I have been to see this painting because of the story that I'm about to tell you. It is 12 foot tall by 14 and a half foot wide, so it's big. It's a big painting, and it was done in 1642, and its official name is often known as the Night Watch, but its real name is the Shooting Company of District 11 under the command of Captain Franz Bannockcock. And it is a curious painting with a curious story of resilience and restoration, because this painting has attracted all sorts of madness in its time, in its many, many years. So very early on, about kind of maybe 60 years after it was commissioned, they decided to move where it was going to live. And they moved it into a smaller house, like a smaller room. The space was smaller. And so, first of all, they just chopped it. Just willy-nilly chopped off 2 characters of the Edge, which are now lost completely, and they were lost. In World War II, because it was like really valuable, they rolled it up, stuck it in a tube, and then moved it around to stop it kind of being stolen by the Nazis and then used as value. So it was stuffed into a tube. And the damage from that being rolled up meant it had to be relined. The back of it had to have a new canvas on it. But since then, it's got even stranger. Well, and a bit before as well. In 1911, a shoemaker he was really, really, really cross about his unemployment. And he decided to take a shoemaker's knife and slashed the painting. So slashed through this valuable painting, which is at the center of like Dutch kind of pride, slashed through it. And so the 2 main characters at the front were slashed through multiple times. I think it was 30 times, big slashes. And it was restored. And then in 1975, somebody who wasn't very well, but he felt he was doing it for God. He did it for the Lord, was his excuse, which always tells you something. Took a bread knife and did a really similar thing and slashed the painting. And then more recently, in 1990, which actually isn't that recent, is it really? Which is a bit of a crushing moment for me, born in 1990. Somebody took acid and threw it on the painting. And it damaged it. And then at various points when it's been, back in its early history, it was coated in this thick black varnish, which makes the painting seem really dirty. It makes it look like a night scene. And you would think it's called a night, the Night Watch, because it's at night. It's not actually, it's a day scene. But this painting has been tarnished. It has been damaged. It has gone through the wars. Literally, it has experienced all sorts of hardship. And each and every time, it has been carefully and painstakingly restored. It has been stitched back together. It has had its varnish restored. It has had its pigments changed. It has been rebacked onto new canvas. And it has been restored. Why? The subject is influential, is powerful, is quite interesting if you're into history or musketeers. Yes, but not that reason. It hasn't been restored just because it's big and that's, things that are big are quite cool. It's been restored because its painter is considered one of the greatest visual artists in Western history. So each and every time, this painting has been restored because it is a work of Rembrandt, and it is considered valuable. It has been restored because its potential is more than what it has gone through. And Ephesians 2 tells us this: you are God's masterpiece. God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It is a gift for God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things that we have done, and none of us can boast of it. For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Jesus Christ so that we can do good things he planned for us a long time ago. I read a really interesting quote here by, it's the one, to forgive. It's Lewis Smead, sorry, my slides are a bit dark. It says this: to forgive and to find forgiveness is to set a prisoner free and discover that that prisoner was you. That we have value and we seek God's confession. We seek confession. We seek God's forgiveness. We seek the forgiveness of others, not because we don't have value, but because we do. We often hear that life is too short, that life is too short to live with sin and shame and hurt and bitterness. Life is too short to have things robbed of us and to live life in muted colour. But this passage reminds us it's not just because life is short, it's because life is valuable and because you are valuable. Your potential, your createdness, who you are, because you are created by the master creator, you are too valuable to live with the things that we often choose to carry, with our hurt, our grief, our disappointment, the times when people hurt us, the times when people rob us and injure us. We are too valuable to live a life which is muted by the worst of what life can be. And forgiveness from God comes to bring us restoration. Forgiveness isn't this abstract thing that we might sometimes feel or not feel. It is restoration to life in all its fullness. And that when we seek that restoration for ourselves and for our world and for others, we become witnesses, just like the painting The Night Watch is, to the joy of being restored. We become more valuable because of what we have lived through, not less. And our prayer this morning is that we would be witnesses to the good life, to the joy of restoration in forgiveness, that we would be set free and brought to wholeness through that forgiveness. And that in doing so, Eric Watterson says this, by forgiving the hurt and the disappointments of your past, you release it from holding on to your future and hindering your progress. We can release what has gone to grasp fully a future which is not yet realized. We are going to put this into practice. And I said at the beginning of this series that the Psalms are meant to be used. They're meant to be prayed and sung and used. And I'm going to invite Mum to come up. You may have noticed on your seat that you have a piece of thread, a string, and we're going to use that. If you haven't got one, just take a minute now to grab one because that's going to be at the center of what we're doing. But we're going to use this psalm, and then afterwards Neil's going to help us with some worship to confess this morning, just as David encouraged us to do.
I wonder if you've